Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the LGBTQ Inclusion Workshop. My name is Lisa Falco, and I am the New Jersey PTA Leadership Convention Chair and Region 6 Director. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Ashley Chiappano from Garden State Equality. Ashley Chiappano is a parent, advocate, facilitator, and trainer. She has worked in the nonprofit and public service fields for over 10 years. During her time as a public servant and child welfare professional, she trained and licensed many LGBTQ foster and adoptive parents for the Department of Child Protection and Permanency, while also participating in their Safe Space program. Over the past 2 years at Garden State Equality, Ashley has expanded existing programming and developed new initiatives that serve LGBTQ+ youth and the greater community. As the Safe Schools and Community Education Manager, she oversees 5 initiatives: Teach and Affirm, Library and Community Education Series, LGBTQ+ Youth Advocacy, Youth Caucus Leadership Program, and Educators for Equality. As part of Ashley's role as Safe Schools and Community Education Manager, she oversees the first of its kind in the nation data-driven LGBTQ inclusive curriculum pilot program, that's a mouthful, for New Jersey's public schools. Ashley received her BA in Communications, Public Relations, lost my place, and Journalism from Monmouth University in 2005, and her MA in Human Services from Capella University in 2010. She loves educating others on how to make schools safer for LGBTQ+ youth and is committed to creating safe and affirming school environments. Ashley enjoys spending her free time going on adventures with her 4 amazing kids. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi. So thank you for the long introduction. But today I am really here to be able to share ways that parents and educators and community members can work together to create inclusive environments for LGBTQ youth and adults. We're really going to be focusing on the most recent work we've done, which is our pilot program, and talk a little bit about LGBTQ inclusive curriculum or lessons and resources and how they connect to the experiences of parents. So what I'm going to do is share my screen with y'all. So this is a PowerPoint structure, but at any point you can ask a question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and use the raise your hand button, and I will try my best to answer that question and go from there.
You can also, use the Q&A, chat, Q&A, or raise your hand, whatever works best for you.
Yep. So I will be drinking coffee throughout this because I'm a mama and it's late in the day. So just bear with me. So here is a lovely title, right? Parents Partnering, that's spelled wrong. Parents Partnering for Progress. So today I just wanted to start off by saying that New Jersey PTA and Garden State Equality met almost 1.5 years ago when we first started our pilot program, and we were really invested in making sure that parents had a voice in LGBTQ inclusive lessons and resources. Like was shared, I'm a mom. I have 4 children under the age of 12. So, you know, really knowing what LGBTQ inclusive curriculum is, what that law meant, was important to me as well. So we did meet with NJPTA and talk about how they could support this initiative through their already existing LGBTQ inclusion efforts. So as it says here, National PTA does have a statement on LGBTQ inclusion. Basically says that all children and families are included, including LGBTQ families and youth who identify within that community. So we're really grateful for their support, especially with our pilot program, but more importantly, that they have a national statement on inclusion for this particular community. So who's Garden State Equality, right? I introduced myself, I said a little bit about myself, but Garden State Equality is New Jersey's largest LGBTQ education and advocacy organization. Education being a huge pillar of what we do. A lot of the work we do is go out and educate folks in a multitude of spaces, hospital systems, schools, community organizations, on the lived experiences of the LGBTQ community, but also how folks can learn more about how to support the LGBTQ community. It is never our goal, and I want to be very clear here, it is never our goal to change anyone's religious or cultural beliefs around ways they can or cannot support an individual person or group. We're really here to say LGBTQ people exist. We've always existed, and you know, depending on where you live in our country, your privileges and your rights to live a full life may look very different. So we want to make sure people have all the information that they can about this community. So that's a little about us. In terms of this LGBTQ lessons and resources pilot that we just completed in June of 2020, we worked with an organization called Make It Better for Youth, which is out of Monmouth County, New Jersey. It is run by an amazing veteran educator, Kate Oakson. And Kate, myself, and Dr. Lori Burns, which you'll learn a little more about when I talk about the lessons, developed a program to really figure out if educators and parents understood what LGBTQ curriculum even was, right? Like what is it? What does that mean, right? This law was passed in 2019 and lots of media attention around New Jersey's public schools teaching this topic, but what does it really mean? So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that today as well. But we did partner. All of the lessons and resources that I'm going to share on our website, which is completely public for any parent to see or use, we wanted to be clear that New Jersey educators and administrators developed all of those lessons. We as an equality organization, we're there for all kinds of things like technical assistance, handling professional development, and really working with those educators. And of course, right, we need funding to do all of that. So some of our funders that were able to fund this project were the Brightmeyer Foundation, PSE&G, Bright Art Electric Company. They have a huge diversity initiative and were able to support this endeavor. NJPTA, Union County Pride. Union County is the only, or I should say one of 4 municipalities that has an LGBTQ office, specifically for a municipality. So they're a really important office and they supported our programming as well. If you love Bruce Springsteen or any kind of New Jersey music scene, the Rock and Roll Forever Foundation did support us as well. And they have all kinds of lessons and resources that can be accessed by educators that are free and parents, whoever wants to learn about this particular topic. So in every training that I do or webinar that I do, I always want to make sure that we're on the same page. I never know, especially with webinars, right, who is on the other side of the computer. So please know that this is a space for everyone's voice to be heard. You can ask any question you want. I will try my best to answer that question for you. And if I don't have the answer, I will try my best to get your information and we can find an answer to that question. I always want to give out a couple of group norms, again, depending on how this topic, LGBTQ identities, connects to you or doesn't connect to who you are or how you identify or what you think about this particular group of folks. Please know that there are a couple of expectations I have when learning about this topic. So first is treating each other with dignity and respect. This can be a hot topic for some folks and something that's completely normalized for other folks. Please trust each other. Please don't be defensive. If I use language, I'm really here to teach you all and that y'all can learn. Practice being open-minded, give people the benefit of the doubt, be transparent, and seek to first understand and then be understood. So if you pop something into that chat that could be hurtful to somebody, please know that I'm going to try my best to have that conversation and get that out of the way if there's any issues with communication, right? So those are our group norms. And if you want another norm, you can throw that right into the chat if there's anything that I missed. And Lisa can check that. So the first part of this I want to make sure that we know is a little bit about New Jersey. We're kind of an anomaly of a state when it comes to LGBTQ inclusion. So the first part of what I'm going to quickly go over is we have one of the toughest anti-bullying laws in the country. Garden State Equality was a big part of this passing the anti-bullying law, and we have since been involved in the process of making edits and changes to that law. And obviously, LGBTQ students are part of the anti-bullying law because it's based on our New Jersey law against discrimination. We are a state that has full protection for LGBTQ people under our state civil rights protections. So the second thing that we have here in New Jersey is a ban on conversion therapy for minors. Conversion therapy, also known as reparative therapy or ex-gay therapy or sexual orientation change therapy, is illegal in the state of New Jersey for minors. It is a practice that has a direct connection to severe mental health issues and suicidality. It is extremely dangerous to expose young people to reparative or change efforts around their sexual orientation or gender identity. And if you're a licensed clinician and practice these techniques, you can lose your license. So we made sure that that was illegal for minors here in our state, but there's tons of other states where this is perfectly legal, which connects to why we need LGBTQ lessons and resources in the classroom. Which brings us to the LGBTQ Inclusive Curriculum Law. So in 2019, this law was passed, and essentially we are the second state to pass an inclusive curriculum law for LGBTQ identities. Our law was very specific and much different than California, which was the first state that passed this law. So our law says that all New Jersey public schools are to teach about the social, political, and economic contributions of LGBTQ people and those with disabilities. And this should happen in both middle and high school. And a couple other caveats of this law are that each individual school district can decide on what instructional materials and policies they would like to implement. So it does kind of open this very broad opportunity for schools to choose the lessons and resources that work for them. And it isn't limited, which I think can be a benefit depending on your district and your school population. So with that said, we will move on to what Garden State Equality and Make It Better for Youth did to really prepare for this law to go into place, which starts, the implementation year is this September, so 2020-2021 school year. So to give a quick overview of the timeline of how we got to this 2019 law, this was not overnight that we started talking specifically about LGBTQ identities or these contributions of this community in our public schools. In 2006, we changed our law against discrimination to include LGBTQ people, right? So if you are a person who identifies as gay or trans or non-binary or any other identity that falls under the LGBTQ category, you are protected under our law here in New Jersey, our law against discrimination. And schools are listed as places of public accommodation. Public schools are listed as places of public accommodation. We know that our Title IX efforts, right, around sex discrimination in our state. At the federal level, these things have changed, but at the state level, our LAD is pretty comprehensive. Like I said, anti-bullying law, California in 2001 passed the FAIR Act, which was that first LGBTQ inclusive curriculum law. We were the next to pass that in 2019, but in 2017, your New Jersey Department of Education passed something called Transgender Student Guidance. And this guidance was a 10-page document really outlining for public schools how to treat students who identified as transgender or gender nonconforming or outside of a cisgender identity category. And it was a really comprehensive document, the first of its kind in the nation, and schools are still learning that it exists. So we know that there's going to be a process in getting these LGBTQ lessons and resources into schools during this kind of initial time frame, because it took a number of years for them to get access to student guidance, which was passed in 2017. So what is inclusive curriculum, right? So what exactly is this? So LGBTQ inclusive curriculum is really a set of lessons and resources. What we did in our pilot program was develop 45 lighthouse lessons, so lessons that could be adapted and changed based on the educator's need, that across 7 subject areas, ranging from grades 5 through grade 12. We wanted to make sure these lessons reflected the communities where each school existed. So all of our lessons have an intersectional lens, right? Based on race, ethnicity, culture, whatever kind of intersection of your identity might be outside of your sexual orientation or gender identity. We know a whole person isn't one piece, right? So we really made sure our lessons kind of hit on a number of topics so that educators could integrate them in their already existing curriculum. Because we know each individual school district might look a little bit different in our great state of New Jersey. So with that said, this took quite some time, so I'm going to go over a little bit more about the pilot so that you kind of understand the reason. We called this a pilot program because we did some research. So what we knew was, right, that students were experiencing school in a really, really difficult way. So our LGBTQ youth were experiencing bullying, hearing homophobic comments. They were missing school, right? They had lower GPAs. They weren't going on to higher ed. They were having challenges around social emotional learning, right? And we were like, how do we help educators do this work to meet the needs of not only LGBTQ students, but students who may be in positions where they are the bully or they are contributing to making a school unsafe, right? So how do we get all students involved in this in terms of learning, right? The process of learning about who somebody is and how they identify. So we were like, the first thing we tried to figure out is what's being taught, right? What do schools currently do to include LGBTQ youth? So what we found out is about 20% of LGBTQ students were taught positive representations about history or events around the LGBTQ or gay liberation movement, and about 19% were taught negative content. Less than half of LGBTQ students could find information around LGBTQ topics in their school libraries, and about 19% have been taught negative content around LGBTQ topics, maybe not even history, but just topics in general. Now, we are not a state that has laws prohibiting educators from talking about this topic, but there are many states that do. So we are lucky here in New Jersey that we have not had those restrictions even without this inclusive curriculum law. So just in terms of time, I'm going to skip this video because we only have an hour. But if you'd like to see our video around LGBTQ inclusion, this is on Garden State Equality's website. So you can go to gardenstateequality.org and check out this video from Brianna. Brianna is an amazing young person, and you can hear about her story if you pop onto our website. So what is an LGBTQ inclusive lesson, right? So what we heard a lot when we started meeting with educators was, and parents, all of our pilot schools had parent education workshops where we showed parents the lessons and resources that could potentially be used to teach this topic to their children. So what we got a lot was this blame, right? Or this idea of a blame game. You know, we can't teach this topic because ... insert any number of issues. And what I really wanted to make sure that parents knew and educators knew was what an inclusive lesson was, right? What does it actually mean? So for us, the first thing is for an educator is checking their own bias, right? Be conscious of our own lived experiences and how they're represented in a lesson, right? If we inherently feel a particular way about a particular population of people, that may come through when we're teaching. So I really wanted to make sure that educators had the opportunity to learn about their own bias. So all of our pilot schools were trained in anti-bias work, anti-racism work, and LGBTQ inclusion work. So they had the opportunity to kind of deconstruct these topics before they even started writing a lesson within our pilot. The second was language, right? Learning a language is just as important as writing that lesson, right? So if you are writing a lesson and the language is not there, it can really be disheartening for a young person to hear you say an inappropriate pronoun or describe them in a way that they don't connect to. So being comfortable using terms like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer is super important. We let our educators know that access is also important. Do not hide this information from anyone. Provide students and parents and any other educator with access to information about what you're teaching, right? Just like any other topic, please share your lessons and resources with folks that want to see them. And moments, right? So there are many opportunities for educators to provide information outside of the classroom. So sometimes it could be intervening in a bullying incident in the hallway and providing a little bit of education around LGBTQ people, to being in a staff meeting and, standing up for a student with an educator who might not be inclusive, right? So it's not always about the actual fully drawn out lesson. And then the last one was exploring, right? The learning new topics can be challenging for anyone. And we want to give parents and educators the time to make connections to this content. It's not going to be an overnight process. We know that. We want to make sure that we start somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about New Jersey, right? So our inclusive curriculum pilot program was also a research study with Stockton University. So what we wanted to find out before we started saying, hey, teachers, go out and teach these LGBTQ topics, we wanted to know, one, what do educators need to be prepared, to be prepared to teach these topics? What perceptions did educators have about teaching LGBTQ topics? Were they comfortable? Were they not comfortable? Did they feel supported by administrators? Did they feel concerned about parents? Where were they at in the process of learning? And then how this is going to impact school climate. What did educators think? And what did some of our parents think about how this topic would change positively or negatively a school environment? So that's kind of generally the questions that we asked in the pilot. So the pilot program itself, like I said, it was Garden State Equality, Make It Better for Youth. We worked together to develop these lessons. We had 15 curriculum writers, which were New Jersey educators, and a couple of program managers, which was me, Dr. Lori Burns, and Kate Oakson. And then we had some folks going out and doing training. So all of our pilot schools had the same mission in this process of learning. The data collection was really part of that study, which was done by Stockton University. But what we really wanted to do was have this vision where each school district that was implementing these lessons would have support in doing so. And some of our vision statements included things like creating a culture that fosters inclusion for LGBTQ people, respects people's various backgrounds, and promotes affirming and accepting of students' identities, right? We really wanted to make sure that was important. And what we knew from tons of data through GLSEN and Teaching Tolerance and other inclusive lessons and resources options, that simply having LGBTQ inclusive lessons and resources not only changes the environment for the LGBTQ student, but it also changes positively the environment for our non-LGBTQ students who identify as cisgender and straight, right? So that environment can change positively for those students as well. So the structure of the pilot, we had 12 schools, not 12 districts, 12 schools, and we provided lessons for a 6-month period. We met with the educators teaching those 45 lessons, and they could choose which lessons they wanted to use, and there were a couple of parameters. We met with them, spoke with them. They were assigned a coach to help them develop additional lessons and resources for their classrooms, and got tons of feedback about, hey, this lesson makes sense, or I need more information for this lesson, or, my students didn't do so great with this lesson, so that we were able to make edits when this went live just a few days ago. How were schools chosen? So we actually chose schools who might not have had the best track record in terms of being inclusive. We were really looking for schools who were motivated to learn and had administrators who were invested in this process. So for us, it was not about picking a school who already was doing this. We were really picking schools that were willing to learn. We chose schools based on a system of like a rubric system. So everyone kind of got a score, and we were able to choose schools based on kind of where they fell. We also picked schools specifically in rural, urban, and suburban environments so that we could see what these lessons look like depending on where a student went to school. Teachers were chosen based on really educator standing, meaning like that they were consistently in attendance, right? That they were in good standing in general. There was no other real requirement. We actually told them, please do not pull in your LGBTQ identified educators because those are likely the people who will have this information already. So let's pick educators who don't identify within the community, choose folks that are going to be learning in this process. So every school got the opportunity to have a full day of professional development where they got to learn that anti-bias work, anti-racism work, and LGBTQ work. We offered them online support and coaches. So they had lots of opportunities to write appropriate lessons. Every school had 2 parent education workshops. So this was a time where parents could come and speak to us about their concerns. We had tons of workshops where parents said, I don't agree with teaching this topic in school, or I'm uncomfortable about this, or this seems really overwhelming. I don't want my child to learn this topic. And on the flip side, we had lots of parents who thanked us for creating a school environment that was safe for their LGBTQ young person. So we had a really wide range of parent interaction on this topic. We took in all of that information to make sure that this was going to be the most helpful and connective experience for not only educators and administrators, but for parents as well. So we really wanted to make sure we heard from everyone in the community and not just the folks that were implementing lessons. The biggest part that I want to make sure we get across here is who decides what's important, right? Who decides what's important to learn? So, you know, LGBTQ history and this process of learning about this community started way before 1969 and the Stonewall riots. But what we know is that depending on who's telling the story may start in a different spot. So like I said, I'm going to pull up the website in a few minutes for y'all to see, but our lessons were very intersectional in nature. We talk about things like patriarchy. We talk about things like gender identity. We talk about things like how the media connects to the things that we learn within this community and outside of it. We wanted to make sure that educators understood that they may or may not have engaged in these topics, or they may have a limited amount of information about the history of this community. And how are educators going to really determine what's important, right? So the way we did that was asking those questions at the beginning of the pilot and surveying educators on what they think the most important thing to teach a student is around LGBTQ topics. I want to stop here for a moment and share with you that the part of this that I always get a question about is the disability part of the law. So the law does say that public schools are to teach about the social, political, and economic contributions of LGBTQ people and those with disabilities. Now, the reason that that was kind of connected in the law was based on how the law went through in terms of passing it, and it was written by folks who thought that was a very important piece to keep. With that said, we are not disability justice folks at Garden State Equality or Make It Better for Youth. And it was really important that the community that does disability justice work were able to write lessons and tell their stories appropriately. So we're hoping that that community will be able to pull in some of those lessons about the social, political, and economic contributions of those living with a disability and how positively they have contributed to our society. But we are still waiting on those. So as soon as that happens, we will also share that out on our website once we know. So if that question ever comes up, why did we not do disability? We're not the folks that have the expertise in that area. So again, right, so when we look at LGBTQ history, there's so many places that we can start, right? The Mattachine Society in the 1950s, right? Talking about decriminalizing homosexuality and, you know, making sure that it wasn't defined as a mental illness. to movement history, right, being super dangerous. Like, how do we share with students what it was like to identify and be out as an LGBTQ person, right? We know that LGBTQ people faced significant challenges and were marginalized based on who they were. I mean, we had a federal ban on if you were even assumed to be LGBTQ, you couldn't be part of federal employment. Right, harassment by law enforcement, estrangement from your faith community. And we know some of these things have changed over time, but we also know that literally maybe 4 weeks ago, our federal civil rights protections finally said, you're right, you cannot be fired from your job for being LGBTQ. And that was only 4 weeks ago. So up until 4 weeks ago, if I lived in a state that did not have a state civil rights protection, I could be fired from my job for being who I was. So when we talk about progress has been made, but not as fast as we would like. Right? Marriage equality, right? Just because you're able to marry who you love across all of our states does not mean that LGBTQ people have full equality. So I think when we're talking about these topics, it's really important that we tell the truth in our stories, right? And educators need to have that baseline of knowledge, and parents need to have that baseline of knowledge when they get asked questions about what this all means in a school system. Right? All of our educators that were in our pilot got really clear LGBTQ training. We talked about identities very specifically, but I want to be very clear. All of our lessons and resources focus on the social, political, and economic contributions of this particular community or individuals within this community. Their private lives are not really a part of the way in which we're telling that story or teaching that lesson. We're really here to talk about what it was like to experience the world while also existing in this very marginalized community, right? So I want to make sure that's clear, because I think there have been some misconceptions about what talking about LGBTQ people from a curricular standpoint or a lessons standpoint looks like. And the best example would be when we're talking about folks who have run for president in our country, right? Let's talk about history or social studies. Pete Buttigieg and his husband Chasten ran for president, right? So when we talk about that in our history, we can't just dismiss the fact that he had a husband, right? We can talk about the fact that marriage equality was passed in 2015, which allowed someone like Pete Buttigieg to run for president, right? Openly. So when we talk about those kind of historical constructs, there are ways to do that, right? Are we talking about his relationship? Sure, right? He has a husband, but we're really focusing on the things that he contributed. That's the plan. That's the goal, right? Of inclusive lessons and resources. So with that said, again, making sure that we use language, we kind of went over this, and I want to make sure we have time for questions as well, because I know we have about 25 minutes left. I want to be very clear too that it's really, really important that parents understand and educators understand that the LGBTQ community, though the entire community has experienced, levels of marginalization or discrimination over time and in history, there are advantaged and disadvantaged parts of this population as well, just like kind of any other population you talk about. So when we talk about this, the bottom line is if you are a white man who identifies as gay, you have a ton more privilege than somebody who may identify as maybe a lesbian that's a person of color, or if you're transgender or you are part of a religious minority and also part of the LGBTQ community, or an immigrant or a senior, right? So we know that intersecting identities was a very important part of developing lessons that could talk about all parts of who we are, and touch on the fact that we understand that the lived experiences of one person in this community are not the same as the lived experiences of every person in this community. And that students should know that too, right? And know the term intersectionality and understand it and internalize what that can mean for them. So our pedagogical approach, right? So we wanted to be very clear. The approach to inclusive lessons and resources for us was Sims Bishop's windows, mirrors, and sliding doors. Again, because of time, I'm not going to play her video, but if you want to look her up, she's on YouTube, and you can type in windows, mirrors, or mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. She pops right up on YouTube. So Sims Bishop was very clear in saying that students need to, one, be either be reflected, right? Be able to see someone that looks like them or experiences the world the way that they do in their classroom. So, right, a mirror, someone they're able to see. Similarly to themselves. Or a window, the opportunity for a student to see outside of their lived experiences into another world, somebody else's world, or a sliding glass door, right? Be able to step out and actually experience the world from a different perspective. Right. And it was really important in her description in the 90s. She was talking about having diverse books, right? She was talking about making sure that classrooms and students didn't get a misrepresented view of what the world was actually like because they didn't have access to diverse perspectives and differences, right, in all kinds of educational resources. Sims Bishop has been amazing. We've used her resources to develop all of our lessons. And of course, we want to make sure that each child has access to lessons that impact social emotional learning, right? When we talk about people's lived experiences, LGBTQ community, we know that this is going to connect in a multitude of ways to social emotional learning, right? When we look at friendships, belonging, self-esteem, we know that this particular population kind of falls in different areas when we're looking at this whole spectrum, right, of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And we're looking at how that hierarchy works. And our LGBTQ kids, sometimes they don't even have a place to live, right? They don't have family support, right? We love when kids do. It's amazing when parents are supportive of their child's identities, but when there's not, we know that sometimes school is a safe haven, right? So being able to access information that says you are a whole person, you exist, we appreciate you, and we affirm who you are can be life-saving for young people. Again, in lieu of time, we're not going to play this video, but if you would like to hear a story about what inclusive lessons and resources can be like for a student, this is Eli. He is a transgender boy. He is amazing. We love him. He does a lot of work with us. And he talks about his story about being a trans young man and what his lived experience was like in school. It was very positive, and it's a great opportunity to see what it's like when you do accept and affirm a young person for who they are. And you can check, if you type in Grace and Eli's story on YouTube, you can find them right away. They pop right up. And he has a couple of other stories. He's a hockey player. It's the NFL and the New Jersey Devils did a story on him too. So you could check him out. He's really, really an inspiration to see. All right, so I talked a ton about what inclusive lessons and resources are. So what we're going to do is just get onto our website, right? Let's check out some inclusive lessons and resources. So I'm going to share my screen again. Just give me one moment so I can get out of this screen and get you into another screen. Let's go to lessons. Share my screen again. All right. Can everyone see that? You can like just put a thumbs up in the box or in the chat and just let me know if you can see the screen, just so that I know. Lisa, are we good? Okay, I see a couple people popping in. All right, good. So you can see it. Great. So, so this is our LGBTQ lessons and resources website. This is completely open. If you would like to, on your computer, type in to your internet browser, teach, T-E-A-C-H .LGBT, this website will pop right up for you. So these are the inclusive lessons and resources that we developed for New Jersey Public Schools. Parents can utilize them. Anybody who wants to take a look at our site and look at them can absolutely do that. So kind of a little bit about who we are, which I shared before. Like I said, a couple of us. So Dr. Burns, myself with blonde hair, you can see that's a little different. Betsy Erbaugh from Stockton University and Kate Oakson from Make It Better for Youth. We had a ton of curriculum writers that contributed to all the beautiful lessons that you'll see in just a moment. You can see here that we have lessons in all of these areas: English language arts, math, science, social studies, visual and performing arts, and world languages. All of these lessons and resources have connections to LGBTQ identities or connections to sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression more broadly. We have this really fun second grade lesson that an amazing author shared with us, but most of our lessons are 5th through 12th grade. So I'll give you an example of one lesson that I just really love, and I think it's a great way to connect information for young students. So we have a lesson called Better Nate Than Ever. It's based on a book. This book is about a young boy who is not like your typical boy. He is into theater and wants to go to Broadway, and that's his goal. And it's about a story about how his parent really couldn't kind of connect with him and until he figured out kind of who he was. It's really interesting about this book is this book does not have an LGBTQ topic, right? Or an LGBTQ character. Nate does not identify as gay or anything else. And this particular lesson really gives your 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, depending on how you scaffold the lesson, the opportunity to look at things like stereotypes, right? Why do we assume Nate is a particular thing, right? Why do we call Nate feminine, right? Or why do we call Nate gay? Or why do we use particular words to describe Nate, even though he doesn't identify any particular way? It's a really great way for educators to bring up topics. We've used this lesson a ton, especially in the pilot, and students really connect to the storyline. It's a way to kind of deconstruct, right, what students might know or not know about who somebody is based on how they present externally, right? Which I think is a great way to start this conversation, especially with our 6th graders, right, our younger students. In places like social studies. Like I said, we have lessons from women in the Revolutionary War and talking about gender to patriarchy, right, and colonizing America. We have lessons about Sakia Gunn, a young lesbian identified 15-year-old girl from Newark who was murdered, and no one knew who her story was. No one knew her story, even though years earlier, Matthew Shepard's story was really, really a national attention or had national news. We really look about the intersection about like why Sakia's story did not impact the same way, right? It didn't have that impact. Not to say that there was, obviously Matthew Shepard's story was devastating and horrifying. But when we talk about intersectional identities, right, her lived experience as a young Black lesbian identified teen who was also had her life taken away from her at a very young age. We want to know why, right? What are those constructs around why her story didn't make news, right? Why weren't we outraged? Why weren't people protesting? Right, and as you kind of move through the site, right, we have lessons around civil rights activism and how sexual orientation and gender identity connected to that activism, and who were some of the folks that fought for our civil rights protections that also identified as LGBTQ that aren't in our history books. And then lessons like the Pink Triangle, right, which connects to our Holocaust mandate, right, Holocaust and genocide studies. What does the Pink Triangle mean? Why was it used during the Holocaust to identify LGBTQ people, right? These are stories that can be told that already meet some of the standards we already have. The other part of this I want to share too is that all of these lessons meet New Jersey core content standards. So as you can see, I'll click on this lesson, but I want to make sure that y'all can see this, is that at the top, unit and lesson, New Jersey Learning Standard, we provide the learning standard for every single lesson to make sure that you can utilize and integrate these lessons into your existing expectations or learning expectations. We are not putting this on educators to have to reinvent their already existing lessons and resources, but really be able to take this and say, oh, I can pull maybe the guiding question or the essential question or the cultural competency piece of this lesson into something I'm already doing. We know that educators have a lot on their plate, and we want to make sure that they're able to teach this topic without something super overwhelming or having to add something different. In terms of resources, we provide everyone, and I would love parents to read this, on information from gender identity to sexual orientation. We have a copy of that transgender student guidance I talked about on the website. We talk about civil rights protections around bullying and around gender identity. These are from our civil rights organization, Division on Civil Rights in New Jersey, but you can find those. We have fact sheets on LGBTQ language, right? So from basic learning all the way up to really more intensive learning options for parents and educators. And then for educators, we really have this breakdown of ways that they can talk about these topics. We provide book lists that are bilingual, middle and high school resources. And then though the law doesn't include elementary, we do have It's Okay to Be Different, which is a whole toolkit for elementary ed to be able to talk about different kinds of families in a really age-appropriate way. To introduce this topic for young children who may have a same-sex parent or may identify as trans, or right. We want to make sure that we can open that dialogue in classrooms for young kids if they need it. But the mandate doesn't require that, but we do offer that on the site as well. And then really making sure that kind of broad educational organizations have access. We have guidance from the PTA is up here on our sites as well. And then making sure that if these lessons and resources don't work for a particular person, that there are so many other organizations like Teaching Tolerance, GLSEN, Welcoming Schools, GLAD, Teach Rock. There are so many places where parents and educators can go to look at this information and kind of go from there as they continue to do this. Let me get out of the stop share. We have about 10 minutes left. So I really wanted to give time for questions or thoughts. So it's really the whole point is of LGBTQ lessons and resources is to be able to affirm our LGBTQ students, right, to have them see themselves reflected in the stories we're telling, right, the lessons and resources that we're offering, to be able to have students be safe in their schools, but also to make sure that students who don't identify within this community can learn that this population exists and can treat them with dignity and respect, right? That's our goal, right? Is to all experience dignity and respect when we're in educational spaces. And we hope that's what those lessons and resources will do for LGBTQ youth and their peers. So yeah, if anyone has any questions or thoughts, please feel free to share. It's quiet.
Lisa Falco. I'll start, of course, because I always have a question. Well, I'm more of a comment, I guess. It's just such a wealth of information that you just presented in 40 minutes or so.
Correct.
There's so much more to it that I feel like I almost don't have a question because I want to go read and absorb, and then I might have some questions. I don't have kids in school anymore, but I have grandkids.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different relationship between a grandchild and a grandparent and schooling, because you're not really in the everyday trenches.
Yeah.
But being involved in PTA, I'm still very interested in education, especially what goes on in my community. I'm paying for those salaries and all those educational resources. So I think I'm fascinated in a way by the amount of work that your organization has done and put together as resources for teachers and parents and families. I think it's fabulous. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you. Yeah, listen, I'm a mom. So I have 4 kids. I have a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 7-year-old. So I am obviously very invested in what they're learning each and every day. I always want to know, what's happening with them, how things felt for them when they were learning. And I know that sometimes this is going to be a topic that families are going to say, I don't know enough about this. This makes me uncomfortable. I'm not sure. And we really want to make it so that if you need to learn, we're here to help you learn, right? You know, I'm a parent to a child who identifies as transgender. I had to learn, right? I had to learn as a mom. So for me, I think it's really important that having access to accurate information is essential. And then helping normalize identities and help students understand differences is super important. It's great to say, be kind to everyone, but I think our students need to understand why they aren't being kind. Like, why do you see things the way that you do? And when you're in a school setting, how can you be considering and affirming and caring based on differences, right? We're all a little bit different, and it's important that we learn who people are. I did put my email in the chat so that if you toggle through that website and you're like, this is confusing, or hey, I want to learn more about that, you could always email me. All of the contact information for my team is on the website as well, Dr. Burns and Kate Oakson. So if you have specific questions for them, they will absolutely respond in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you. I see Natty, or Natalia, as some of us know her through PTA. She said, thank you for this amazing insight, and she agrees with me. We go way back now through PTA, so thanks for that thought, Natalia. Miss ya.
So the other thing I want to share too, so obviously with school, everything that's going on in school right now and COVID, we know that you are probably having virtual PTA meetings, or you are like scrambling to figure out what you're going to be doing in terms of the school year. So I do want to share, if you would like me or any of my team to do a virtual presentation to your PTA members, please just reach out. You know, we know that funding is limited and all of that. So we will absolutely work out us being able to present this information in the most effective way, because we really want to make sure parents are learning, right? That's my goal. So if you want us to hop onto a webinar for an hour or half an hour during your virtual PTA meeting, let us know and we'll pop on and talk about whatever kind of you would like around this topic.
That's awesome. And we'll share that with all our local units.
Yeah, for sure.
That would be, I think, a great topic to have after a business meeting, or maybe before the business meeting. They can decide that on their own, but I think that it's, again, it's just such a wealth of information. And I also think that almost everything that applies to this particular subject is really applicable to all aspects of life. The tolerance, the empathy, the understanding. Let's face it, that be kind to each other in this world. That's you know, lacking a lot. And
yeah, I mean,
it's all relevant, so relevant.
Yeah, I mean, we know there's a lot going on in our world right now. We are seeing, you know, experiences of communities that have experienced marginalization for hundreds of years, right? Our Black and Brown communities. We know that the LGBTQ community, we know that, you know, if you break down kind of those lived experiences of individual communities, they all experience the world differently and have all experienced marginalization very differently, right? And the things that they have had to go through to exist today was very different, right? But when we look at that bigger picture of how we treat people based on who they are, if you don't learn the truth about how we've treated people in the past, we really can't move forward, right? So I think having this education on what it was like to be in this particular kind of what we're doing, right? This very niche LGBTQ focus is, hey, let me tell you what it was like, and let's not have it be like that anymore, right? And we're going through a reckoning in our country for a number of reasons, and we want to make sure that as we move forward and have these conversations, our kids understand, right? Our kids really are getting it. And our parents, right? If our parents have never had the opportunity to learn about experiences of marginalized communities, this is their opportunity to learn, right?
Agreed.
Us for the LGBTQ piece, and then any other experience of folks who experience marginalization kind of across the board, right? So
thank you. So also Ginger shared with us on our Q&A that this was a wonderful presentation and there is much to digest here. She will be asking her school district what they're doing to incorporate this into the curriculum, and hopefully bringing you to a PTA meeting in their area to speak. So that's great. Any other questions? Because we're just about done with our time frame.
Yep. So if you have no other questions, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me today. Please, if you have any questions, my email is in the chat, or you can just toggle through that website and click on the link, and you'll be able to get to me from there as well.
Great. And I would like to say on behalf of New Jersey PTA, thank you so much for being with us today. Great presentation.
Thank
And
you.
everyone that's on, I hope you join me in thanking Ashley in your head, maybe not necessarily on the screen or in person, but and share the information with your members. And just a little bit of housekeeping for those that are on. The link for the evaluation of the workshop is in the chat box. So you can either click on it right now and do it, or it will be in the daily emails for the rest of the week that you're getting in the morning. And once we sign off here with Ashley, we'll have a little bit of a break, and 5:45 will be our next session. So return to your email from this morning and click on that link for our panel on what will learning look like in September. Dun, 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 dun. So again, thank you, Ashley. Thank you, everyone, for coming on. Have a great day, and I'll see you at the next session.